Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take documents, sometimes dense reports, sometimes really complex legal texts, and we pull out the threads to help you understand the world.
And today we've got something special. It's a single government statement. Just one.
Right, from the government of Antigua and Barbuda. And on the surface, it seems pretty straightforward. It's just a press release about a U.S. visa issue.
But once you start peeling back the layers, this document becomes a real lesson in how the actions of a few people, a really small number, can be leveraged by a powerful nation to affect an entire country.
It's an entire world of diplomacy and finance packed into a few paragraphs. So our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to decode the very specific, almost technical language around this U.S. visa bond pilot program.
And we're going to look at why it happened. Crucially, Antigua's government is very frank about the reasons, the behavioral and financial triggers.
And then we'll get into the fight back, the diplomatic counter strategy that Antigua is using to try and correct this.
And we have to start with the real shock factor here, the core tension that you can feel throughout this entire statement. The government admits, almost painfully, that the conduct of a tiny number of their own citizens,
just a few people,
has created this huge diplomatic and financial problem that now impacts every single person from Antigua and Barbuda who wants to travel to the U.S. It basically turns individual mistakes into a national security issue.
That ripple effect, the idea that a couple of unpaid hospital bills could spark a high-level diplomatic confrontation, that's what makes it so fascinating. We're not talking about, huge trade disputes.
No, not at all.
We're talking about the granular day-to-day consequences of how people behave when they're abroad. Okay, let's jump straight into the technical side of this policy, because the public anxiety when this news broke must have been huge. So, Section 1. What is this U.S. visa bond pilot program?
Right.
When you hear the words visa bond, I imagine the first question everyone with an American visa asks is, wait, do I have to pay something now? What is this thing and who does it actually affect?
And that panic management was clearly the government's #1 priority. The very first thing the document does is provide absolute clarity for people who already have visas.
Okay, so what's the word for them?
They state it very clearly. No bond applies to holders of existing U.S. visas. If you have one, it's still valid. The terms haven't changed.
That is such an essential reassurance. I mean, if you got your 10-year tourist visa 5 years ago, you can still pack your bags and go. The U.S. isn't coming back and asking for money retroactively.
Precisely. It's a forward-looking measure only. So after calming everyone down, the statement then pivots to defining the scope of this new program. They acknowledge that Antigua and Barbuda has been included in this pilot program.
The phrase pilot program itself is interesting, isn't it?
It is. It suggests this is a test. It's a targeted, maybe temporary intervention by the U.S. They're trying out the bond as a tool to manage risk, before maybe they make it permanent or roll it out to other countries.
So it's not the full permanent policy hammer yet?
Not yet. And the Antiguan government is incredibly careful with its words here. They stress that the bond applies only to a very narrow category of new visa applicants.
That phrasing feels very strategic. They're trying to stop mass panic and draw a clear line between the huge majority of people and the very few who might be affected.
It's definitely strategic. But we need to dig into what narrow category actually means. They add another condition. This only happens for applicants who qualify under limited exceptions while the main U.S. visa restrictions are still in place.
Okay, let's drill down on that for a second. These limited exceptions, for anyone listening, what would a limited exception even look like in the complex world of U.S. visas?
Well, normally when you apply for a U.S. non-immigrant visa, the main thing you have to prove is that you're going to come back home. You have to show strong ties to your own country.
Your job, your family, property.
All of that. Now, when a country gets put into a special program like this, the consular officer's default suspicion gets even higher. A limited exception might be for someone who doesn't quite meet that high bar, but there's a really compelling reason to let them in anyway.
Like a humanitarian reason, maybe? Or a critical business deal?
Exactly. Imagine someone who has maybe slightly weak financial ties to Antigua, but they absolutely have to travel for an urgent business contract that could be worth millions.
So the U.S. might want that business to happen, but they're still worried about the risks.
Right. Or maybe it's someone whose travel history isn't perfect. Maybe they stayed a few days too long years ago, but they have an elderly parent in the U.S. who needs urgent medical care. These are gray areas. The consular officer is balancing the risk of them not leaving against the genuine need for the visa.
And the bond becomes the thing that tips the scales.
It becomes the final assurance mechanism. It allows the officer to say, okay, I'll approve this visa, but only on the condition that you post this financial collateral.
So just to be crystal clear, the bond doesn't affect whether you're eligible in the first place. It's a gatekeeper for those borderline cases, the high need, maybe slightly higher risk applicants who might otherwise just be denied.
That's the perfect way to put it. And the statement reinforces this by clarifying what the bond does not do. It says it does not apply to all travelers, and crucially, it doesn't guarantee or deny a visa. It's just a condition placed inside the process.
The visa is sort of hypothetically approved based on need. The bond just ensures compliance.
Yes. And that word compliance is key.
It feels bureaucratic, but it's everything here. What is the stated reason from the U.S. authorities for even creating this bond program?
The document is clear on this. It says the purpose of the bond is to encourage compliance with U.S. immigration laws. And it gets even more specific to guarantee timely departure.
Timely departure, that's the heart of it. The U.S. wants to be sure that when your authorized stay is up, whether that's 6 months or 3 months, you actually get on the plane and leave.
That's the number one concern.
But why a bond? I mean, if the risk is that high, why not just deny the visa application outright?
Because just denying everyone is a blunt instrument. It hurts legitimate tourism. It damages business relationships. It can even harm diplomatic ties. The bond is a much more surgical tool for risk management.
How so?
By introducing the bond, they create a financial instrument, a pool of collateral that offsets the potential costs if someone doesn't comply. And these bonds can be serious money. We're often talking $5, $10, maybe even $15,000.
Wow, so this isn't a small fee. We're talking about a deposit that could be more than the entire trip costs, and you only get it back if you follow the rules.
You only get it back once there's documented proof that you left the United States on or before your authorized departure date. If you break the rules, that money is forfeited.
It completely shifts the financial risk, all the potential costs of, say, future deportation proceedings or other burdens on the state.
It all gets shifted directly onto the applicant or their family. It's a very sharp, very effective mechanism designed to make someone think twice before overstaying.
And this brings us right to the most fascinating part of this whole story. Section 2. The core conflict. This is where the Antiguan government stops the diplomatic language for a moment and just gets brutally honest about why the U.S. felt it had to do this.
This section is the absolute core of the document. The government uses the phrase, in that context, we must be candid. It's a huge signal.
What does it signal to you?
It signaled that they knew just denying the problem would be pointless. The U.S. clearly had data. So instead, they made a strategic choice to own the failure of a few of their citizens in order to protect the rights of the many.
So what were the specific localized problems they admitted to? What were the behaviors that added up to this massive policy headache?
They named two main issues, and they align perfectly with the purpose of the bond we just talked about. First, the obvious one. Instances of overstays by some of their nationals, people not leaving when they were supposed to.
Standard immigration issue.
Right. But the second one, this is the one that gives the U.S. so much leverage. Charges placed on the U.S. public purse.
Okay, let's spend some real time on that phrase, charges on the public purse. It sounds so abstract, but the government gives a very concrete, very visceral example.
They do. They specifically point to unpaid hospital bills by a small number of our nationals in the United States.
And that detail changes everything. It turns a vague immigration concern into a very real financial dispute between two countries.
Absolutely. Because the cost of healthcare in the U.S., especially emergency care, is just astronomical. There's a U.S. law that says hospitals can't turn away anyone who needs emergency treatment, no matter who they are or if they can pay.
So a visitor from another country overstays their visa, has a heart attack, and gets rushed to the ER. The hospital has to treat them.
They have to. And if that patient has no insurance, no social security number, and no way to pitch a bill that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, who pays for that?
That's the multi-million-dollar question.
And that financial shock just ripples through the system. The hospital eats the cost at first as uncompensated care. Then they might try to get subsidies from state or federal programs,
which are funded by
taxpayer dollars, hence the public purse.
Yeah.
When this happens, the U.S. government sees it as a direct, measurable financial loss that they can trace right back to the non-compliant behavior of a foreign national.
So this gives the U.S. State Department hard, undeniable evidence. They can walk into a meeting with their Antiguan counterparts and say, look, It's not personal. We have spreadsheets. We have $2 million in documented unpaid medical bills from your citizens over the last 2 years. This bond program is designed to stop that from happening again.
Exactly. The bond suddenly stops being about a generalized fear of immigration and becomes a tool of direct fiscal responsibility. It's the U.S. trying to push its social costs back onto the citizens of the home country. It's just brutally effective bureaucratic leverage.
The thing that still gets me, though, is the proportionality. The statement keeps emphasizing this is a small number of people, but the cost of a few huge hospital bills is now being spread across every single legitimate new visa applicant through all this extra scrutiny, and for some, a 5-figure bond.
And that's the tragedy that the Antiguan government itself is pointing out. They say these actions, the overstays, the unpaid bills, create problems, not just for the individuals who did it, but, and this is the key part, for all Antiguans and Barbudans who travel legitimately.
This is the core policy lesson for you, the listener, to really take away. Your individual financial decisions on foreign soil can actually translate into a national policy restriction. It can affect the travel freedom, the business opportunities, and the family visits of thousands of your fellow citizens who did absolutely nothing wrong.
And the fact that the government is saying this publicly is just huge. It means they've accepted that this small minority gave the U.S. a powerful, data-driven justification for a policy that hurts everyone.
It totally reframes the diplomatic challenge for Antigua.
Completely. Now, their job isn't to deny the problem. It's to prove that the overwhelming compliance of the vast majority of their citizens should outweigh the financial leverage created by the failures of a few.
I have to wonder about the debate that went on inside the Antiguan government. Why choose this path of candor? Wouldn't it have been easier, politically, to just deny everything and call the U.S. policy arbitrary and unfair?
It's a fascinating diplomatic calculation. I mean, think about it. If they had just denied it, the U.S. could have easily released some statistics, maybe leaked some details of the worst cases to the press.
And Antigua would have looked like they were hiding something.
Exactly. By being candid, they get ahead of the story. They control the narrative by emphasizing the small number. And most importantly, they position themselves as a credible, responsible partner who is willing to deal with the problem. That candor is diplomatic currency, especially when you're the smaller nation in the negotiation.
It sets the table for their counter-argument perfectly. It allows them to say, yes, we see the problem and we're working on it, but your solution is completely disproportionate to the scale of that problem.
Precisely. It's the springboard they use to launch what the document frames as Section 3, the diplomatic offense. They have to counter the U.S.'s very concrete financial claims with equally concrete data about their own citizens' good behavior.
All right, let's get into that offense. The statement is very clear. The second this bond was announced, the Prime Minister's office went into overdrive. What were the specific diplomatic steps they took?
The response was immediate, and it was serious. This wasn't treated as some minor consular issue. They saw it as a threat to their national interests, to travel, to business. The document says that on the direct instructions of Prime Minister Gaston Brown, there was a direct re-engagement with the U.S. State Department at the highest levels.
And what does highest levels mean in this context? We're not talking about a call between embassy staff.
No. This means the negotiation bypassed the local consulate. We're talking about foreign ministers, senior cabinet officials, maybe even the Prime Minister's chief of staff getting directly involved with their counterparts in Washington, D.C.
And how did they make their case? Because in diplomacy, the format you use to communicate is almost as important as the message itself.
They used a formal diplomatic note. For anyone listening, a diplomatic note, or a note verbale, is one of the most serious, official ways one government can communicate with another.
It's not an email.
Definitely not an email. It's a formal, written document. It's registered. It's sealed. It expresses an official protest or a request or definitive position. It's something that can't be easily ignored, and it becomes a permanent part of the official record between the two countries.
So this note wasn't just a complaint letter. It was an official, almost legal protest, laying out Antigua and Barbuda's case clearly and firmly on the world stage.
That's it. And at the heart of that note was their most powerful piece of evidence.
Their central data point.
The core of their entire defense. A direct comparison of compliance data. They state very forcefully that their country's visitor overstay rate is consistently low.
This is a direct assault on the main justification for the pilot program, which, as we said, is all about ensuring people leave on time. If the data shows that the vast majority of Antiguans do leave on time, the policy starts to look fundamentally misapplied.
It does. But the real strategic punch comes next. It's the comparative data. They assert that their overstay rate is significantly below that of many countries not subject to bond requirements.
Wow. Okay, that is a stunning piece of leverage.
Right.
That means Antigua and Barbuda has somehow gotten access to, or at least accurately deduced, the internal metrics the U.S. uses to judge risk.
It seems so. And they're using it to challenge the consistency of U.S. policy. They're basically arguing, hold on, if country Y, which doesn't have a bond requirement, has a 2% higher overstay rate than we do, why are we the ones being penalized? Your policy is being applied unfairly.
It's brilliant. It forces the U.S. into a corner. They either have to admit their policy is being applied selectively, maybe because of those unpaid medical bills, or they have to explain why Antigua's excellent overstay rate is somehow being ignored.
They're holding a mirror up to the U.S. policymaking process itself.
So the diplomatic note is essentially a two-pronged attack. First, if this bond is about overstay risk, our data proves we are not a high risk.
Right.
And second, if this is really about the financial risk from a few unpaid bills, then your solution is too broad. You should target those individuals, not punish our entire traveling public.
That is the fundamental thrust of their argument. But their defense had a second pillar, one that relied less on statistics and more on geopolitical positioning.
What was that second pillar?
It was all about their history of collaboration. They made a point to highlight Antigua and Barbuda's long-standing cooperation with the United States on immigration compliance and security matters.
This is the "we're a good partner" card.
Exactly. They're reminding the U.S. that they aren't some rogue state. They're an active, cooperative ally in the region on shared security goals. Things like counter-narcotics, sharing intelligence on threats, border control.
It's a subtle but powerful reminder of reciprocity.
In the world of diplomacy, it's essential quid pro quo. The underlying message is, we help you with security that benefits the U.S. homeland. And in return, we expect fair and reasonable treatment for our citizens when it comes to things like travel. By imposing this punitive bond program, you risk damaging the goodwill that makes all that crucial security cooperation possible.
So, when you analyze their ultimate diplomatic goal here, what is the specific outcome they're demanding from the U.S. in this protest?
Their primary objective is spelled out very clearly. They want to ensure that Antiguan and Barbudan passport holders are treated no less favorably than nationals of other CARICOM countries.
Let's define that for the listener. What is CARICOM, and why is that comparison so critical to their argument?
CARICOM is the Caribbean Community. It's an organization of 15 Caribbean nations and dependencies, all working together on economic integration and cooperation. By bringing up CARICOM, Antigua cleverly reframes the issue. It's no longer just a bilateral dispute between them and the U.S.
It becomes a question of regional fairness.
Precisely. They are demanding that the U.S. apply a consistent standard of treatment to all of its partners in the Caribbean.
So if the U.S. has a certain set of visa rules for the Caribbean, and Antigua's compliance rate is better than the regional average, then singling them out for this bond makes the U.S. policy look discriminatory.
Yes, discriminatory against a proven partner. It's a very powerful appeal to regional consistency. And their second objective flows directly from that,
which is
ensuring that visa processing for their citizens continues on fair and reasonable terms. The clear implication here is that a potential $15,000 bond on every borderline applicant is neither fair nor reasonable, especially given their high compliance record.
So they want the bond gone.
They want it gone entirely, or at the very least, they want its use severely restricted to only the most extreme and specific cases of documented financial or compliance risk.
This whole high-stakes dialogue has obviously been going on for a while. So let's move into our final section, the ongoing discussion and the government's appeal to its own citizens. Where do these negotiations actually stand right now? What is the government telling people?
They're being very careful about managing expectations. They describe the ongoing discussions as serious, measured, and persistent.
Let's break that down. Serious.
Serious acknowledges that the U.S. has dug in on its policy, likely because of those very real financial losses we talked about. This isn't a trivial matter for them. Measured indicates they're avoiding angry public rhetoric. They're sticking to the diplomatic back channels and letting the data do the talking.
And persistent.
Persistent is the assurance to the public that they're not backing down. They're going to keep at this.
That whole phrase, serious, measured, and persistent, suggests they know how hard it is to get the U.S. to reverse a policy, even a pilot program.
They absolutely do. And they followed up with a necessary dose of reality. They state that outcomes in international affairs are never guaranteed. They are not promising a win here.
That's a brave thing for a politician to admit.
It is, but it's also honest. They know that even with the best data in the world, geopolitics or just the sheer bureaucratic inertia of a U.S. government program can be impossible to stop.
But they still seem to have some hope. Where is that hope coming from?
It's rooted in their data. Their core conviction is that there is room for reason to prevail. This is a direct appeal to the rational actors within the U.S. State Department. They're asking them to be guided by the evidence, the low overstay rates, and not be driven solely by the financial damage caused by a tiny minority.
And they reiterate that the government is working strenuously to get a correction of the measure.
Yes, that language is important. A correction, not a cancellation. It signals they might be open to a compromise as long as the current disproportionate measure is fixed.
This entire process must be so politically delicate. They're fighting the U.S. government, but at the same time, they have to manage their own domestic audience and, crucially, address the root behavior that started this crisis in the first place.
And that's where this diplomatic statement becomes an internal policy tool. They use this high-stakes international negotiation as a platform to issue a very clear, very direct appeal to their own citizens.
The final call to action. What is that explicit appeal?
They urge all citizens traveling abroad to respect immigration laws fully, and, this is the key part, to meet all personal obligations.
Meet all personal obligations. There it is. That is the unmistakable direct link back to the unpaid hospital bills. It's the government basically saying, we know exactly what caused this, and we need your help to fix the underlying behavior so we can win this diplomatic fight.
It is the ultimate call for collective responsibility. The government is stressing once again that the conduct of a few can affect the many. The core message is this: when you hold our passport, you are an ambassador. You carry a piece of our national reputation.
Your decision to overstay a visa by a week or to walk away from a debt in another country
Has real, quantifiable diplomatic and economic consequences for your family, your neighbors, and every single person from your country who wants to travel in the future.
It's a fascinating way to reframe it. It shifts immigration compliance from being just a passive rule you follow for a foreign country to an active social contract among your own citizens. You're defending the collective travel privilege of your entire nation every time you leave on time or you pay a bill abroad.
It elevates individual financial honesty to a matter of national interest. The government is essentially saying, look, we're doing our part. We're arguing the data at the highest levels in Washington. But we need you, the citizens, to stop giving the U.S. the ammunition they're using against all of us.
And to wrap it all up, they promise transparency.
Yes, they promise to continue to keep the public informed, and they reaffirm their commitment to fully engage in defending the interests of Antigua and Barbuda and its people. It's an assurance of continued effort, but it's an effort that is now clearly and publicly dependent on citizens playing their part.
It's an incredible journey. We've gone from a simple public concern to the granular financial mechanics of the U.S. restriction and all the way into this very sophisticated diplomatic counterattack.
The balancing act is just amazing. They have to own the problem internally to their own people, while at the same time aggressively defending their national reputation externally using that powerful comparative data.
But I want to circle back on that for a second. If they are being so candid about the overstays and the unpaid bills, doesn't that undermine their primary argument that their overstay rate is low? How do they square that circle in the diplomatic note?
That is the most nuanced part of their whole strategy. They're arguing that the problem is qualitative, not quantitative.
What do you mean by that?
They're saying, yes, we have a few very costly incidents. That's the qualitative problem. But, they argue, those incidents are so rare that they do not reflect the overall behavior of our people, and they don't justify penalizing the vast, quantitatively proven majority who are compliant.
So by acknowledging the few bad apples, they gain the credibility to argue more forcefully for the 99% who follow the rules.
Exactly. They're saying the U.S. solution is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The distinction between that qualitative risk and the quantitative compliance is the central pillar of their entire argument for why the U.S. measure is disproportionate.
It's an incredibly fine line to walk.
It is. The U.S. is focused on the high dollar amount attached to the qualitative risk. Antigua is focused on the overwhelmingly positive percentage attached to the quantitative compliance. It's a battle of metrics.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over. We've established that having a consistently low overstay rate, which is probably the best data a country can have, was not enough on its own to stop this policy. It couldn't offset the financial damage caused by just a few people.
The data wasn't enough.
So, what specific measurable steps beyond just writing formal diplomatic notes can a small nation really take to protect the travel privileges of its people in a world that is just getting more and more scrutinized?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The traditional tools of diplomacy seem to fall short when they're up against hard financial data. Maybe small nations need to get more creative. Maybe they need to create domestic programs like mandatory state-backed travel insurance for certain types of travelers to cover any potential U.S. medical costs before they even leave the country.
So they would preemptively solve the financial problem for the U.S. Or maybe they need formal agreements where the home government agrees to take direct financial responsibility for any documented debts their citizens leave behind.
That would be a huge step. It would move the issue from a diplomatic protest to a proactive policy solution. It would shift the entire burden of risk from the U.S. taxpayer back to the home government, which would completely remove the core leverage the U.S. used to justify this whole program.
But whatever the solution is, the underlying question from this document remains, what is the true cost of non-compliance?
It's not just the individual fine. It's not just the unpaid hospital bill. It's the diplomatic friction, it's the erosion of international trust, and it's the increased financial burden and inconvenience that gets imposed on every single legitimate traveler who comes after you. That collective price is what this one small, powerful statement forces us all to confront.
That's a powerful point to end on. Thank you for helping us decode the incredible layers of complexity hidden inside this government statement.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.